A waitress is fired for serving a man wearing a MAGA hat, but next day she gets the shock of her life. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the city streets as Emily Harper unlocked the doors to Jake's Diner. Outside, cars whizzed by, their tires humming a familiar city tune. The bell above the door jingled, and Emily turned instinctively, ready with her standard smile. But her smile faltered for a split second as a man in a bright red MAGA hat walked in. He wasn't the type of customer they usually saw here. His hat alone made him stand out in this progressive part of the city, where such symbols often carried heavy baggage. The man didn't seem to notice the way conversations in the diner stilled for a moment. He simply nodded politely and made his way to a booth in the corner, where he sat down, placed his phone on the table, and looked over the menu. A group of college students at the far booth exchanged pointed whispers, their eyes darting toward the man. An older couple frowned, their gazes hardening. Emily hesitated for only a moment before grabbing her notepad and walking over. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and warm despite the tension in the air. "What can I get you?" The man glanced up, his blue eyes meeting hers. There was a weariness in his gaze, but his smile was genuine. "Just coffee. Black, please." Emily jotted it down, then turned toward the counter to prepare his order. As she worked, she overheard the muttered comments from nearby booths. "Seriously? A MAGA hat? Here?" One of the college students said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Disgusting," another chimed in. Emily's chest tightened, but she kept her focus on the coffee pot. She had served all kinds of people, rich, poor, rude, kind. Her job was to treat everyone the same. When the coffee was ready, she brought it to the man's table with a quiet smile. "Thank you," he said softly, lifting the cup to his lips. The peace didn't last long. Karen, the diner manager, stormed out of the kitchen. Her sharp heels clicked against the tiles as she approached Emily at the counter. Karen was known for her no-nonsense attitude and her obsession with keeping the diner's image pristine. Today she looked particularly irritable. "Emily?" Karen hissed, jerking her head toward the man in the corner. "What's he doing here?" Emily blinked. "He's having coffee." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't need that kind of trouble here." "What trouble?" Emily asked, genuinely confused. "He's just sitting there, drinking coffee. He hasn't done anything." Karen's voice dropped, but her tone grew sharper. "Do you see that hat? You know what it represents. It's going to offend people. Get rid of him." Emily's stomach twisted. "Karen, I can't just kick someone out because of a hat. That's not fair." Karen's eyes narrowed. "If you won't do it, I will." Before Emily could protest, Karen marched over to the man's booth. The conversations in the diner fell silent as everyone watched the scene unfold. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice cold and clipped. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man looked up, surprised. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" Karen folded her arms. "Your presence is making my customers uncomfortable." The man's brows furrowed, but he stayed calm. "I'm just drinking my coffee. I didn't realize my presence was an issue." "It's the hat," Karen snapped. "Take it off or leave." Before the man could respond, a voice cut through the silence. "That's ridiculous." Everyone turned to look at the source of the voice. It was Fred, one of the diner's regulars, a retired construction worker who sat at the counter every morning with his newspaper and a plate of scrambled eggs. "Since when do we throw people out for wearing hats?" Fred said, his gruff voice carrying across the room. "This is America. People can wear what they want." "Yeah," another customer chimed in, a young woman in a hoodie. "He's not bothering anyone. Leave him alone." Karen's face flushed red as more voices joined in. "This is discrimination," the older couple said, glaring at Karen. "You're the one making people uncomfortable." Karen's jaw tightened as she looked around the room, realizing she was losing control of the situation. The man in the hat sat quietly, his expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. Emily stepped forward, her voice firm but respectful. "Karen, this isn't right. He hasn't done anything wrong. We serve everyone here. That's the whole point of this diner." Karen's eyes blazed. "You're overstepping, Emily." "I'm just doing my job," Emily replied evenly. "And my job is to treat every customer with respect." Karen opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, the man stood up. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the customers who had spoken up for him. Then he turned to Karen. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," he said calmly. "I just wanted a cup of coffee. But I appreciate those of you who stood up for me. It's nice to know kindness still exists." With that, he pulled a $50 bill from his wallet and placed it on the table. "This should cover my coffee. Keep the change." As he made his way to the door, he paused by Emily. "Thank you," he said softly, "for treating me like a person." Emily nodded, her throat tight. "You're welcome." The bell jingled as the man left, and the diner fell silent once more. Karen's face was a mask of anger and embarrassment. She turned to Emily, her voice icy. "You're done here." Emily's heart sank, but before she could respond, Fred slammed his coffee cup down on the counter. "If she's gone, I'm gone too." "Same here," the young woman said, grabbing her bag. "This place isn't worth it." One by one, customers began leaving, their support for Emily loud and clear. Karen stood frozen, her authority crumbling around her. Emily untied her apron and set it on the counter. She looked Karen in the eye, her voice steady. "You might want to think about what kind of business you're running, Karen, because right now it's not one I'd be proud to work for." With that, she walked out the door, her head held high, not realizing that this was only the beginning of an even bigger twist that would change her life forever. The cold morning air hit Emily's face as she stepped outside the diner. Her cheeks burned with a mix of humiliation and anger. But beneath it all was an overwhelming sense of relief. She had stood up for what she believed in, even if it had cost her a job she desperately needed. Emily walked down the street aimlessly, unsure of where to go or what to do next. Bills were piling up at home, and Max, her younger brother, relied on her income to keep them afloat. She couldn't afford to be unemployed, but she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. Kicking someone out for wearing a hat, no matter what it represented, was wrong, and she wasn't going to be part of it. Lost in thought, Emily nearly bumped into a man handing out flyers on the sidewalk. "Hey, watch it," the man muttered, thrusting a paper into her hand before moving on. She glanced at the flyer without much interest, just another job fair advertisement. With a sigh, she stuffed it into her coat pocket and kept walking. Later that afternoon, Emily sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at her laptop. She had been scrolling through job listings for hours, but nothing seemed promising. Either the positions required experience she didn't have, or they were too far away. She was beginning to feel the weight of her situation when a knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Standing cautiously, she walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. To her shock, it was the man from the diner, the one in the MAGA hat. Emily hesitated before opening the door. "How did you find me?" The man held up his hands in a calming gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I asked one of the regulars at the diner for your name. Took a little digging, but I wanted to find you." Emily's stomach churned. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Can I come in? I promise it won't take long." Against her better judgment, Emily stepped aside and let him in. The man looked around her modest apartment, his eyes lingering on the stack of bills on the table. He turned to her, his expression serious. "First, I want to thank you again for standing up for me back there. You didn't have to, and I know it cost you a lot." Emily crossed her arms. "I didn't do it for thanks. I just didn't think it was right." "That's exactly why I'm here," he said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Because I think you deserve to know the truth." He handed her the paper, and Emily unfolded it carefully. Her eyes widened as she stared at the photograph in her hands. It was an old picture of a group of soldiers standing in front of a military truck. Her breath caught when she recognized one of the men. It was her father. "My name's Jack Callahan," the man said, watching her reaction closely. "Your father and I served together overseas. We were part of the same unit." Emily's mind raced as she studied the photo. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her and Max to navigate life without him. She had always known he was a soldier, but he rarely talked about his time in the military. Now here was a stranger claiming to have known him. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Because your father saved my life," Jack said quietly. "It was an ambush. We were pinned down, and I was hit. Your dad dragged me to safety, risking his own life in the process. I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for him." Emily sank into a chair, the weight of his words settling over her. I didn't know." Jack sat down across from her. "After the war, I lost track of him. It wasn't until a few years ago that I learned he had passed. I've been trying to find his family ever since. When I saw you at the diner today, I recognized you immediately. You have his eyes." Emily swallowed hard, her emotions swirling. "Why were you wearing that hat? Do you know how much trouble it caused?" Jack's expression softened. "I wear it because it's a reminder. A reminder of what I fought for. I know it's a polarizing symbol, but for me, it represents the sacrifices men like your father made. I didn't expect it to cause such a stir at a diner, though." Emily leaned back, struggling to process everything. "So what now?" "You found me. What do you want?" Jack smiled gently. "I want to help you. I know what it's like to struggle. I've been there. And after what you did for me today, I think it's time someone stood up for you." Before Emily could respond, Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the table in front of her. "What is this?" she asked, staring at it suspiciously. "Open it," he said simply. With trembling hands, Emily opened the envelope. Inside was a check. Her eyes widened as she read the amount. $5,000. Her heart raced, a mix of shock and disbelief. "I can't accept this," she said, pushing it back toward him. "Yes, you can," Jack said firmly. "Think of it as a thank you for your father, for you, and for standing up for what's right." Tears filled Emily's eyes. She wanted to argue, to protest, but the truth was, she needed the money desperately. Still, accepting it felt complicated. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Jack stood, his expression kind but resolute. "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me one thing. Don't stop standing up for what you believe in. Your father would be proud." And with that, Jack walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. "Oh, and Emily, don't let people like Karen get to you. They're not worth it." As the door closed behind him, Emily sat at the table, staring at the check in her hands. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. But she also knew this wasn't the end. Karen's actions couldn't go unchecked, and Emily wasn't done standing up for what was right. The next morning, Emily woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The check from Jack had eased some of her immediate worries, but it didn't erase the bitterness of how Karen had treated both her and Jack at the diner. Something needed to change, not just for her, but for everyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop. With her savings, Jack's generous gift, and her determination, she began researching. She read articles, laws, and policies about workplace discrimination, freedom of expression, and employee rights. Her anger toward Karen transformed into something more productive, a drive to hold her accountable. By mid-afternoon, Emily found herself standing outside Jake's diner. It felt strange to be back so soon, but she wasn't here for her old job. She was here to set things right. Inside, the familiar clatter of plates and the hum of chatter greeted her. The place looked the same, but the energy felt different. Several regulars were absent, likely still upset about what had happened the day before. Emily spotted Karen behind the counter, her face pinched with stress as she argued with a delivery driver. Emily took a deep breath and walked in. The bell above the door jingled, and Karen's eyes snapped toward her. Her expression darkened immediately. "What are you doing here?" Karen demanded, her voice sharp. "I thought I made it clear, you're not welcome." Emily didn't flinch. "I'm not here to work for you again. I'm here to talk." Karen rolled her eyes. "I don't have time for this." "Make time," Emily said firmly. Her voice carried across the diner, and several heads turned to watch. "What you did yesterday wasn't just wrong, it was illegal." Karen froze, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "You fired me for refusing to discriminate against a customer," Emily said, her tone calm but unwavering. "That's a violation of labor laws and basic human decency." Karen scoffed. "I didn't fire you for that. I fired you for insubordination." Emily took a step closer. "Is that what you're going to tell everyone when this goes public? When the media hears about how you tried to kick someone out because of their beliefs? Because I've already spoken to a lawyer, and trust me, they're interested." Karen's face turned pale. "You're bluffing." Emily pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. "Am I? Because I also have several witnesses from yesterday who are more than willing to back me up." Karen glanced around nervously. A few remaining customers were openly staring, whispering among themselves. Even the delivery driver, who had paused mid-argument, was watching the exchange. "Listen," Karen hissed, lowering her voice. "I don't need this drama right now. Just, what do you want?" Emily crossed her arms. "I want an apology. To me, to Jack, and to the customers you drove away with your behavior. And I want you to start treating your employees and customers with respect, no matter who they are or what they believe." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, it seemed like she might explode, but the weight of the eyes on her and the threat of legal action seemed to deflate her. "Fine," Karen muttered, barely audible. "I'm sorry." Louder, Emily said, "so everyone can hear." Karen's face flushed with anger and humiliation. "I'm sorry," she said louder this time, "for what happened yesterday." Emily nodded. "Good. Now if you'll excuse me, I have somewhere to be." Leaving the diner, Emily felt a sense of accomplishment, but she knew this wasn't just about Karen. She wanted to make a broader statement about kindness, fairness, and standing up for what was right. Inspired by Jack's story and her father's sacrifice, she decided to share her experience with the world. She sat in the nearby park, composing a post for social media. She wrote about what had happened at the diner, Jack's kindness, and the importance of treating everyone with respect, even when their beliefs differed. She also included a heartfelt tribute to her father, explaining how his courage had inspired her to stand up for what she believed in. When she hit post, she didn't expect much to come of it, but within hours her story began to gain traction. Comments flooded in, some supportive, others critical, but all engaging with the deeper conversation she wanted to start. People shared her post, and soon local news outlets picked up the story. By the next morning, Emily's phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. She was overwhelmed but also deeply moved by the messages of support. People from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own experiences with discrimination and standing up against injustice. Then she received a message that took her by surprise. It was from the owner of Jake's Diner, a man she had never met. He asked to meet her at a local coffee shop that afternoon. Curious and a little nervous, Emily agreed. When she arrived, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit stood to greet her. "Emily Harper," he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Paul Jennings. I own Jake's Diner." Emily shook his hand warily. "I didn't expect to hear from you." Paul gestured for her to sit. "I heard about what happened at the diner, and I wanted to apologize personally. Karen's behavior doesn't reflect the values of my business." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Then why is she still managing it?" Paul sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She won't be for long. I've already started the process of replacing her. But I wanted to do more than just apologize. I'd like to offer you a job, management, if you're interested." Emily was taken aback. "Management? You showed integrity and courage," Paul said. "Those are the qualities I want in someone running my diner. And frankly, I think you'd do a better job than Karen ever did." Emily considered his offer. It was tempting, but she wasn't sure if she wanted to return to the place where everything had happened. Still, the opportunity to create a more welcoming and fair environment was hard to pass up. "I'll think about it," she said finally, "but only if I have the freedom to make real changes." Paul smiled. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." As Emily left the coffee shop, she felt a sense of closure. The events of the past few days had been chaotic and emotional, but they had also reminded her of the power of standing up for what was right, and the unexpected ways life could reward you for doing so. Still, one thing lingered in her mind: Jack's words about her father's bravery. She wasn't done honoring his legacy yet. Something told her this was just the beginning. Emily walked home from her meeting with Paul Jennings, the crisp evening air biting at her cheeks. Her thoughts swirled as she considered his offer. A management position would give her the stability she desperately needed, but it also carried a responsibility she wasn't sure she was ready to shoulder. Could she really step into a leadership role and create the change she wanted? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Jack Callahan. "Jack, can we meet? There's something I want to show you. I think it's important." Emily hesitated for only a moment before replying. "Emily? Sure. When and where?" An hour later, Emily found herself standing outside a modest veterans center on the outskirts of town. Jack was waiting by the entrance, his red MAGA hat notably absent. He greeted her with a warm smile. "Thanks for coming," he said. "There's something here I think you should see." Emily followed Jack inside, where the walls were lined with photographs, plaques, and memorabilia honoring local veterans. The air was thick with a sense of history and sacrifice. Jack led her to a large bulletin board covered in photos and handwritten notes. "This is the memorial wall," Jack explained. "It's for soldiers from this town who served and didn't make it home." Emily's breath caught as her eyes scanned the board. Near the center was a photo of her father, smiling in his uniform. A small card beneath it read, "Sergeant Michael Harper, a hero to his comrades and his family." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out to touch the photo. "I've never seen this before," she whispered. Jack nodded. "I thought you should know how much your father meant to the people who served with him. He wasn't just a good soldier, he was a leader, a protector. He inspired us to be better." Emily wiped her tears, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. "Thank you for showing me this." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your father believed in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Yesterday you reminded me of him. That kind of courage, it's rare." Emily nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I want to honor him, Jack, not just by remembering him, but by making a difference." The next morning, Emily called Paul Jennings and accepted the management position at Jake's Diner. She laid out her vision for the diner as a welcoming place for everyone, regardless of background or beliefs. Paul, impressed by her determination, gave her full support. Emily's first day as manager was nerve-wracking but exhilarating. She greeted the staff with a mix of firmness and warmth, emphasizing her goal to rebuild the diner's reputation. To her surprise, many of her coworkers were relieved by the change in leadership. Karen's departure had left them hopeful for a better environment. One of Emily's first actions was to create a community wall inside the diner. Inspired by the Veterans Memorial Jack had shown her, she dedicated a section of the diner to celebrating local stories of kindness, service, and resilience. Customers were encouraged to contribute photos and notes, creating a space that reflected the diner's new, inclusive spirit. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't taking her dismissal quietly. She spread rumors about Emily, claiming she was inexperienced and unfit to run the diner. But her efforts backfired. Word of Emily's integrity and her story with Jack had spread far beyond the diner, thanks to social media and local news coverage. Karen found herself increasingly isolated, her reputation tarnished by her own actions. One evening, Karen walked into the diner, her expression unreadable. Emily spotted her immediately but didn't flinch. Instead, she walked over and met her former manager's gaze. "What do you want, Karen?" Emily asked, her voice calm but firm. Karen hesitated before speaking. "I wanted to say, I was wrong about everything. You stood up for that man, for yourself, and for this place. I didn't see it then, but I do now." Emily studied Karen's face, searching for sincerity. After a long pause, she nodded. "Thank you for saying that. I hope you've learned something from all of this." Karen nodded once, then turned and walked out, leaving Emily with a sense of closure. Months passed, and Jake's Diner thrived under Emily's leadership. The community wall became a centerpiece, drawing people from all over the city. Regulars returned, new customers arrived, and the diner regained its reputation as a place where everyone was welcome. One afternoon, as Emily refilled a customer's coffee, she spotted Jack sitting in the same corner booth he had occupied that fateful day. He waved her over, and she joined him with a smile. "How's the new manager doing?" Jack asked, grinning. "Busy," Emily replied, laughing. "But good, really good." Jack leaned back, a satisfied look on his face. "Your dad would be proud." Emily's smile softened. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." As Jack left, Emily glanced at the community wall, where her father's photo now hung alongside dozens of others. Her heart swelled with gratitude and determination. She had found her path, not just as a manager, but as someone who stood for kindness, fairness, and the legacy of a hero. And she knew this was only the beginning.